With this extraordinary challenge of the pandemic, all the pain, the suffering, the challenges, the dislocation, it's happening here in the city, it's happening all over the country. And you would think that that would be something that would cause everyone, from the federal government on down to cities and towns around this country, everyone to think about how we could pull together, unify, focus on our common enemy, the coronavirus. But no, what do we see from our federal government? Unfortunately, not only has the federal government missed opportunity after opportunity to address the coronavirus, but worse, right now we see our federal government involved in a systematic attack on democracy. What we've been seeing in Portland, Oregon, and the different protestations of the president arguing that he was going to send federal officers and troops into American cities, even if they're not welcome. The efforts to undermine freedom of speech, the efforts to discourage people from voting, and not just from the federal government. We've seen it in states all over the country, systematically over recent years, efforts very reminiscent of what people fought against in the 1950s and 60s, trying to win the basic right to vote for people of color. We see systematic efforts to deny the right to vote, particularly aimed at people of color and young people. So this backdrop, this reality that right when we should see the most enlightened, positive approach, we're seeing very underhanded approaches that hurt our democracy. This is what we all have to fight against, and the city of New York will use our power to fight against it as well. So first, we need to put this in context. This might be a little bit of a shock to all of you. It's a shock to me, just the calendar, the reality as we're about to enter August. There are two very important dates coming up, and they're a lot sooner than I think we realize. October 31st and November 3rd. October 31st, November 3rd. The first one, October 31st, is the day that we have a deadline for filling out the census, the last day for New Yorkers to be counted. November 3rd, I think I can say this without any fear of contradiction, the most important election in our lifetime. We've heard that phrase a lot of times. Guess what? This is actually the one, the most important election in our lifetime. Both those dates, the census deadline and election day, are less than 100 days away. So this is a crucial, crucial time for this city and this country. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that everyone is counted and everyone is heard and everyone votes. So first of all, the right to vote, more important than ever right now, and that's why the city of New York supports the New York Civil Liberties Union's lawsuit, which demands an extension of the voter registration deadline. Look, this is a constitutional right that people have a right to vote, but there's a problem in this state, a 25-day cutoff before the election. If you haven't registered by that point, you don't get to vote. That makes no sense in the middle of a pandemic. It means a huge number of people are going to be disenfranchised. We need to make it simpler than ever to vote. So we need to win this case, so that thousands and thousands of people who would be disenfranchised instead participate in November and are able to have an impact on bringing this city and this country back in the midst of this pandemic. Absolutely crucial that people be able to register right up until Election Day. And then, as I mentioned, the census. Now, again, this is a constitutional provision that says every American must be counted, and yet we see incessant efforts to undermine that from the president and the federal government. Look, again, why does the census matter? Because it determines how much federal funding we get. It determines whether we're going to be able to have the kind of mass transit we need, the kind of education for our kids we need. It's very tangible, let alone the fact it determines how much representation we have in Congress. The president is suggesting that he has the power, he alone has the power to exclude undocumented people from that count. Well, Mr. President, you don't have that power. That power resides in the U.S. Constitution, not in the Sharpie in your desk. The Constitution says everyone in the country needs to be counted. And that's what we intend to do. And this week, we're in the middle of a week of action all over the city at the grassroots to get people to answer that census, to be counted. I'm going to be out in Queens later on today myself, reaching out to my fellow New Yorkers, telling them how important it is to get counted. I want to encourage everyone to be a part of this. And now to tell you about it, someone who's done extraordinary work building a huge grassroots effort to get the people in New York City counted. And she has brought energy and creativity to the task. And I really want to thank her for her amazing efforts and her amazing team that she's assembled. I want you to hear from our New York City Census Director, Julie Menon.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and it's great to be with all of you here today. So I want to give a quick update on where we are in terms of the census. The city's self-response rate as of yesterday is 54.1%. So to put that into context, we are 8 points behind the nationwide average. In 2010, we were 14 points behind the nationwide average. So we actually are closing the gap between the city's self-response rate and the country's. But with that said, we have a long way to go. And so as the mayor said, we have launched a Census Week of Action. We are in the streets all over New York City in safe, socially distant activities, in parks and playgrounds. And that hard work, I think, is really paying off because we've seen incredible self-response rates in the past couple of weeks, in particular, 3 times the national average, but we really need all New Yorkers to participate. We have phone banked 1.2 million New Yorkers. We have done peer-to-peer texting to 5.8 million New Yorkers. We have 16 different ad campaigns in 26 different languages. But I do want to say that COVID is perhaps the starkest reminder about why the census matters. If more New Yorkers would have filled the census out in 2010, we would have had more money today for Medicaid, for our health centers. And in addition, the New York City Health Department utilizes census data in an emergency. So whether it was a measles outbreak last year where they looked at census data to determine vaccines, hopefully one day there will be a vaccine for COVID. So this is a time where New Yorkers need to fill the census out and really lean into that. I also want to mention what the mayor talked about interference by the Trump administration. Just last week, New York City joined as a plaintiff along with the lawsuit that is led by Attorney General Tish James. We're a plaintiff on this suit because the Trump administration is once again trying to patently, unconstitutionally interfere with the census. And so we need to put a stop to that. But it doesn't really stop there. Most recently this week, Republicans in Congress are seeking to block the Census Bureau's request for additional time to conduct the census. So we're again seeing this interference, and that's why we really need all New Yorkers to stand up and fill the census out. If you haven't filled it out, it's very easy, 10 minutes, 10 questions. You just go to my2020census.gov to be counted. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you again to you and your great team for everything you're doing. And let's finish strong here. And I just want to say to all New Yorkers, look, I can't tell you how many people have said to me, so much going on, so many challenges. How can I help? What can I do? Everybody, if you want to help, get counted, help others get counted. All you need to do is take those few minutes to make sure your household is fully registered in the census and get other people in your life to do the same. It makes a huge difference, something everyone can do. Okay, speaking of things that everyone can do, we see amazing efforts around the city, grassroots efforts to fight back against the virus, to build back communities, to envision transformation. Because I'll say it again, we are not just going to come back as a city, we're going to come back stronger, better, fairer. I had a wonderful Zoom conference last night with an extraordinary group of leaders led by Congressmember Adriano Espaillat. Leaders of Northern Manhattan and the Bronx. The group is called Uptown West Bronx Vanguard, and really impressive work laid out to me. A vision of how to address a lot of the most pressing issues that the communities are experiencing. And we're talking about communities that have been through a lot in this crisis and before, now want to fight those disparities and come back stronger. Tangible, real proposals. Very moving proposals, particularly in the area of mental health. So I want to thank everyone in the Vanguard group for what you've put together. Our task force on racial inclusion and equity is going to follow up with you to find ways to get going right away on addressing the issues of folks in Upper Manhattan and the West Bronx. But there's nothing more powerful than community people offering their own vision for change. So thank you for your good work, everyone. Now let's go to our indicators. First, the daily number of people admitted to hospitals for suspected COVID-19. The threshold is 200. Today's report, 84 patients. Daily number of people in health and hospitals, ICUs, threshold 375. Today's report, 290. And the percentage of people testing citywide positive for COVID-19, threshold 15%. Today, again, 2%. That's been our number generally for many, many weeks, and that's a very good number. Finally, a few words in Spanish. El censo determina cuántos fondos recibe nuestra ciudad y también cuántos representantes tenemos en el Congreso. Por eso, nuestra ciudad está trabajando duro para asegurarse que cada neoyorquino sea contado. El censo es seguro, fácil y no tiene preguntas sobre estatus migratorio. With that, we turn to our colleagues in the media, and please let me know the name and outlet of each journalist.
Hi, all. We have with us here today New York City Census 2020 Director Menon, Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs Commissioner Mostofi, Test and Trace Corps Executive Director Dr. Long, Laura Wood, Special Counsel of Democracy NYC, and Senior Advisor Dr. Varma. With that, I will start with Juliet from 1010 Wins.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Mr. Mayor. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Juliet. How are you?
Good, thank you. So I wanted to ask you about the Revel mopeds. How is it that they were operating on the city streets in the first place? Is there some kind of approval process for them to begin operating?
That is an important question, Juliet. When I'm not certain about all the legal and bureaucratic steps, I don't want to say things I don't know. So we'll get that for you right away. What I do know is over recent weeks, more and more concerns came up. And I do know also that our Department of Transportation, our Deputy Mayor for Operations, Laura Anglin, were working with Revel to try and address the problems, and some changes were happening, but it was just clear that not enough was happening, and it was time to suspend the service. And again, that service will remain suspended until we are satisfied that it can be done safely, and if we are not, it will not be allowed to resume.
Juliet?
Okay, and to follow up on that, you know, there are various modes of transportation now in the city, motorized bicycles, scooters, et cetera. How are they allowed to operate? Do they just appear on the street? And as far as where they get dropped off, you know, city bikes go into one of those, you know, stalls. But I believe Revels, you could just drop them off wherever you wanted. And I've seen them in bus lanes, you know, just on a curb. So is something like that going to be looked at or regulated?
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been a growing reality that we're trying to best address in a very complex dynamic. We know for a while some forms, newer forms of transportation like the electric scooters, or some of the other different types were not yet legal until the state legislature acted recently. And then we have to figure out how we would create the right rules on a city level. So there's still a lot of work being done to figure out what makes sense. And unlike other places in the country, with the amount of activity in our streets and how crowded our sidewalks are, et cetera, in normal times, obviously, we have greater challenges than almost anywhere else in sorting this through. But that work continues to be done to figure out what are the right rules and regulations for each type of approach. But again, when it comes to Revel, this is a situation where it just could not go on the way it was, and that's going to be on hold unless we can find real evidence that it will be safe.
Next, we have Matt Chase from Newsday.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering, regarding the video that circulated online yesterday of the person being arrested by the NYPD, why specifically was it desirable to effectuate the arrest of this person, when, where, and how it happened?
It was not specifically desirable to do so. So let me frame it, Matt. It's a very important question. I appreciate it. First of all, a lot of us have watched in pain what's been going on in Portland, Oregon. And the fact that you see federal agents, federal officers, federal troops clearly doing inappropriate things meant to undermine our democratic process, that's just thoroughly unacceptable. So anything that even slightly suggests that is, to me, troubling, and it's the kind of thing that we don't want to see in this city. This is not Portland, and I want to emphasize what you see on that video is NYPD officers. There are no federal agents involved, nor would we be involved with federal agents in anything like that. So I think it was the wrong time and the wrong place to effectuate that arrest. The arrest, as I understand it so far, was for damaging police property. I want to affirm very clearly, no one is allowed to damage police property. That is a real offense. That is an offense that can lead to an arrest. And my message to everyone, if you're out there protesting, protest peacefully. You know, we are talking this week about one of the greatest recent American heroes, John Lewis, who epitomized peaceful protest and civil disobedience. There's lots of powerful ways to make an impact without damaging any property. If you damage property, it will lead to consequences. But that was not the time and place to effectuate that arrest. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, so where and how should this person have been arrested, if at all?
Look, I will say again, it is the responsibility of the police if someone's committed an offense, and that's the warrant squad whose job is to follow up, to look for the right moment to do so. I think, again, that given this atmosphere that we're dealing with in our country and the real concerns people have, it just didn't make sense. It made sense to do it in a situation that was clearly not in the middle of an ongoing protest, unless you're talking, obviously, about a particularly serious offense. I'll talk to the commissioner about this more today, but I think there is a better way to get that done.
Next, we have Andrew from NBC.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Mayor and everyone on the call. How are you today?
Good, Andrew. How you feel?
I'm hanging in there. So my first question has to do with schools. Our understanding is the DOE is going to be or has asked for an extension to submit its plans for each of the 1,800 school buildings until August 14th. And our understanding is that the state will indeed grant that extension. That doesn't seem to leave a whole lot of time between August 14th and the scheduled first day of school, September 10th, for parents to plan. I'm wondering if you can address that and what you make of that.
Yeah, Andrew, that's not my understanding. My understanding is that the main plan for the whole school system is due on Friday, and it will be submitted on Friday. A lot of work has gone into that plan over the last few months. We're going to be ready. Now we're talking about individual plans for 1,800 schools. There's no place else in the state that comes close to having to put together individual plans for 1,800 schools. They will be submitted 2 weeks later. My understanding is school districts around the country are doing the same, around the state are doing the same thing, submitting the individual school plans after they submit their district plans. But look, this work is moving intensely. We are going to show the people in New York City more and more in a very visual manner the work that's being done to prepare schools. We're going to get parents their specific schedules in about 2 weeks or so everyone knows exactly what they're dealing with, has time to make arrangements. A ton of work is going into getting this right, and a huge amount of listening to educators, to parents, to school staff to figure out what they need so everyone can be safe. Go ahead, Andrew.
My second question has to do with the statewide crackdown on bars and restaurants with all the violations, suspended licenses. Our understanding is that the state liquor authority has essentially doubled the number of inspectors. They're all kind of secret inspections. I'm wondering, have we reached the point of gotcha on this situation? Are these violations amounting to anything, particularly given what your test and trace core says, which is there has not been even the slightest uptick ever since New York went to outdoor dining and drinking?
Yeah, let's go over the bigger facts because I think it's important. So the last 24 hours, the most recent report we got from the state, 198 new cases. That's very striking compared to where we were for a long time. And obviously, we've been at 1% to 2% in citywide testing now for many weeks. So clearly the big picture is positive because the vast majority of New Yorkers are doing the right thing. The vast majority of restaurant and bar owners are doing the right thing. The vast majority of their patrons are doing the right thing. There's no question in my mind about that. Now, we do need to be vigilant when there's a problem. In fact, the State Liquor Authority works with our city sheriff office. They do combined operations, and where a bar or restaurant is consistently not following the rules, there should be consequences. And Andrew, I think it sends a message to all the other folks to fly right. But notice, open restaurant program now is well over 9,000 restaurants, but we're talking about the number of bars or restaurants that's been shut down is really a handful comparatively. So I think it proves the point. Most people getting it right, but enforcement is still needed.
Next, we have Julia from the Post.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Mayor and everyone else on the call. I just want to step back for a minute and ask a bit of a broader question. Mr. Mayor, more and more at these briefings, you've challenged the premise of questions posed to you by some of the biggest news outlets in the city, insisting that there's a fallacy in the very question rather than answering directly. Do you think that maybe you simply have a very different perception of reality in this city than most New Yorkers?
No, I think I have a perception of life in this city because I've spent so much time with my fellow New Yorkers. Look, I respect deeply the free press, and I've said to you, in fact, specifically, Julia, and many others, thank you for raising issues that we needed to know about or problems we needed to address. But I've been in public life 20 years nonstop in this city, all over the neighborhoods of the city, talking to people, listening to people, watching their lives, understanding their lives. I see the world from the perspective of how can I help people, how can I address their problems. The media has a different imperative, and that's fine. Everyone has a different role to play. But when I hear a question, if I think it's not factually based or I think it's a misinterpretation of what's going on, I'm going to say it. I actually think that's doing right by my fellow New Yorkers to let them know my perspective. They elected me to make decisions on their behalf. I want to let them know what I think. If a question doesn't make sense to me, I'm going to say it. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, you said that, you've spent your life talking to people, listening to people, watching their lives. That's actually exactly what journalists do. And whether it's the New York Post, the New York Times, WNYC, the Wall Street Journal, Hamadia, Bloomberg, nearly every reporter who've been on these calls, you object to the premise of their questions. So how can you square that?
I just said it, Julia. If I think something's not factually correct or a misinterpretation of reality, my job is to tell people the truth as I know it.
Next, we have Rich from WCBS 880.
Well, Mr. Mayor, good morning.
Hey, how you doing, Rich?
Well, a little frog in the throat there, evidently. So I want to ask you about a New York Times piece, which finds a number of workers in it calling the contact tracing program a disaster. What's your reaction to that?
Oh, it's ridiculous. You're always going to find some individual employees who have a gripe. The question is, what is that initiative achieving? It's extraordinary. It's by far the largest test and trace program in the United States. Thousands of good people doing the work, reaching their fellow New Yorkers. As you heard the presentation from Dr. Long last week, depending on which estimate you use, between 2,000 and 5,000 further infections have been stopped because of the presence of test and trace. It's playing a crucial role in addressing people coming in from outside the city who need to be followed up on and quarantined. Now, I think it's achieving test and trace scores, achieving extraordinary things. And I thank God we have it. Thank God we have it, because imagine what is happening in places where you see these massive surges. They rushed ahead without the data and science. They didn't have that kind of test and trace capacity. There's a direct correlation there, Rich. They didn't have the ability to track people and make sure that they were getting the quarantining or support they needed. And lo and behold, you saw an explosion of cases. So no, I think we're in a good place with it. Go ahead, Rich.
Okay. Second question is about the DOE, which has apparently cut funds for a so-called bridge year program, meaning high school seniors apparently will not be able to take college classes, which evidently they were under this program. Is there any chance you think that could be revived, or does the fiscal situation dictate it has to be cut?
Yeah, Rich, there's a lot of different pieces at the Department of Education, so I'll be honest with you, I need to check on the status of that. There were some things that weren't going to be doable either from a budget perspective or logistical perspective, but obviously we want to do the best we can for our seniors. They're going to go through a lot this year. Let me find out more about that and we'll give you an update today.
Next, we have Jake from Gothamist.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Mayor. Regarding the video of the protester being thrown into a van last night, you said that this was the kind of thing you don't want to see happen in the city. What do you think it says about the NYPD's judgment that they saw it differently? And as a leader of the city, do you have any plans to discipline officers involved to ensure this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I don't think this is about the officers, Jake. The officers, members of the warrant squad, going and arresting someone who has an outstanding warrant is actually their job. I think the question is higher up. This is a question of making sure there's coordination to understand we're in a particular historical moment where there has to be sensitivity, where folks are understandably worried by what they see coming out of Washington about the defense of democratic rights. This city, we do have a clear history of understanding there's going to be a lot of protest and peaceful protest, and we honor it and respect it, whatever the point of view. I think this is something where higher up the command structure, there needs to be more coordination. Go ahead.
I mean, if it's the problem of coordination, do you think that there should be discipline for officers higher up? And then also, if I could just tack on to that, we were immediately told that there were rocks thrown at officers during this arrest. Your press secretary actually forwarded us the NYPD statement on that. We've watched a lot of videos. We've not seen any rocks thrown. Do you have any evidence that there were rocks thrown at police? And, given the NYPD's history of lying about rocks in the last few months, should people trust them when they say that?
Well, Jake, respectfully, so here I'll challenge a premise and very openly do so. Every city agency offers information, and sometimes it's not what it should be. So I'm not ever going to sit here and say that if it comes from a city agency, it's perfect. But I will also, especially if it's something where there's emerging information over time. But I will say to you, I've seen plenty of evidence, unfortunately, of rocks being thrown at officers, bottles being thrown at officers, all sorts of efforts to harm officers. That's just, we have to be honest about it. It's not the vast majority of protesters. The vast majority have been peaceful, and they deserve absolute respect for their peaceful rights. The relative few who have engaged in violence have created a problem for everyone, but there are some who have thrown rocks and hurt officers. There's no two ways about it. In this particular case, Jake, we should certainly review it and want to make sure our folks see the video you're seeing, and if there's something that's not accurate, we need to correct it. But I don't have the details on that. But to the question of the command structure, I don't think it's a matter of discipline. I think it's a matter of people understanding what's happening in this moment and making better choices about how to deal with things in this moment of history.
Last two for today. Next, we have Shant from the Daily News. Shant, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Just want to follow up on Jake's question. You're saying that there have been bad judgment with how the arrest unfolded last night, but I think it's the tactic that was seen that really disturbed a lot of people. I mean, this idea of police rushing up on a protester and hustling them into an unmarked van, is that even allowed, I guess, in the NYPD rule book? And if you could start from there. And if it is, should that be changed?
Shant, again, let's put this in the perspective of just what our police have to do on a regular basis. There is a warrant squad. There's been one, as far as I know, for generations. Their work often involves having to do things in a quiet manner by definition, so they don't come up with sirens blaring and always in police vehicles. But it was quite clear that was an arrest being effectuated by the NYPD, as it would be in a lot of other situations. Again, wrong time, wrong place. But I think if someone, again, I need to start at the beginning. The vast majority of protesters do not damage public property. The vast majority of protesters do not assault police officers. Just go down the list of things that you might get arrested for. If you commit one of those acts, there will be consequences. I think there was a better way to do this, though. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, switching gears a bit, I wanted to ask about a recent report from WNYC that found 91% of criminal summonses for drinking in public since January have gone to Black and Hispanic New Yorkers. Can you comment on that statistic? And if you'll take any action going forward to make sure summonses aren't so disproportionately being applied to New Yorkers of color? Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. This is ongoing work, and it's real important work. So, first of all, if you look at what's happened over the last 7 years, and we've gone through a very difficult aberrant period in the last 5 months, but let's just take the bigger perspective of 7 years, consistent reduction in the use of arrests and summonses, a lot more use of warnings. The whole idea is to not arrest or summons where there's a better alternative. And the NYPD has done that very consistently. Where there are arrests and summonses, I want to see constant efforts to address disparity. And that is not only in trying to go to the root of the issue, which is trying to determine where we need an arrest and summons to begin with, but also the things like implicit bias training and supervisors making very clear that disparity is not acceptable. So this is ongoing work. We have more to do for sure. But this is clearly the direction we must go in. And we're going to come out of this aberrant period, I hope, in a matter of months, because the biggest change will be when there's a vaccine. And when there's a vaccine, I think we're going to see a lot of life start to get back to a much more normal place. But the fact is, this work of addressing disparity, we're going to deepen over the next 17 months, regardless of the healthcare situation, because this is something we have been working on from the very beginning.
Last question for today. We're going to go to Henry from Bloomberg.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. How are you doing today?
Good, Henry. How are you?
I'm good. I want to go back to this incident with the unmarked van, the overkill in this arrest, and the reaction that the witnesses on the street saw of this police action. And I want to ask you, after all of these years of sending your message, of doing the training, of conversations with police leadership, how do you explain that this could happen? And I'd like you to assess the damage that this does to the efforts that you've made over the past 6 years.
Henry, it's a very, very fair question. I appreciate the question, but I like the question especially because it allows me to give you perspective. I don't like it. I don't think it was a good decision. Again, the decision to arrest someone who's damaged public property, yes, that's a good decision. The time and place was not. I think it is going to be upsetting to folks, but I don't believe that the mistakes like that are the fundamental reality. I think the fundamental reality is what happens every single day out in the neighborhoods of this city. So I understand there's a focus on videos, and I don't think that's unfair, and there's a focus on protests, and I don't think that's unfair. But I've tried to be really honest with all of you that my central focus from day one has been the lives of millions and millions of people out in neighborhoods and their reality with police. That unquestionably has changed. It's changed a lot. It needs to change more. It needs to change quickly. To the question of, is it frustrating when sometimes a vision is not being fully played out on the ground by an agency? Of course it's frustrating. But Henry, it takes a lot of work to change. For 20 years, the NYPD was told to be aggressive and punitive. Remember the residue of what we saw: high arrest strategy, high stop and frisk strategy. We have deprogrammed all of that, I think in many ways very successfully, but there's more to do. So I look at the big picture, Henry. A lot of change has happened. I have no question the ability of the NYPD to keep changing, and it will keep changing, and that's what matters. Go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to ask you also about the Senate bill on stimulus and how inadequate you feel it is.
Thank you. Go ahead.
How inadequate you feel it is. I'm wondering, what you're doing in terms of being the leader of the largest U.S. city in terms of building a coalition with Republican mayors, Republican governors. They're all in the same boat that New York City is to one extent or another. Where is the coalition building going on that can persuade the Senate to move its bill in a more generous direction?
It's a very powerful question, Henry. The coalition building's been going on since well before the House passed its bill. I've been a part of numerous meetings with U.S. Conference of Mayors. And I want to say, and some people should understand this, a lot of Republican mayors have been a part of leading this effort. And we have strategized together. It's been very productive. And the goal, really, honestly, we understand the challenge is 10 or 12 Republican senators who could be moved most productively and getting grassroots efforts in those states. So the whole effort has been to support Democratic and particularly Republican mayors in key states, get the message out, build from the grassroots, build support from the business community. I mean, I have to say I'm shocked by sometimes the allies you have, but the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has weighed in favor of state and local aid. Build the broadest national coalition, but the real focus, Henry, has been in the states where those swing votes are with the senators and trying to build the voices of everyday people in those states, business leaders, clergy leaders, unions, everyone coming together to put pressure on those senators. And the work with my fellow mayors, I've been really impressed by everyone's coordination. And there's been no daylight between the Democratic and Republican mayors in terms of pushing for this stimulus. With that, everyone, let me just finish. And since we're talking about the federal government, I'm going to pull it back to the census. And again, this is our Census Action Week. I need everyone to get involved in this. Look, parallel this to what we've done on the coronavirus. This city should be so proud. And I hear, as I'm talking to all those mayors from around the country, they're in awe of what the people of New York City have achieved. That we were the epicenter. We went through hell, and yet we've come back so strong because people are all in this together. Let's do the same thing with the census. If you're angry every time you see New York City not get its fair share, fill out that census form. Get everyone in your life to fill out that census form. If you are angry when you see attacks on our democracy, fill out that census form. If you want to make sure New York City gets the maximum support for restarting, rebuilding, fill out that census form. If we all put our energy into it the way we have fought back the coronavirus, we can actually do something extraordinary and help secure the future of New York City. So everyone, let's do that together. Thank you very much.